everybody. My name's Ian Kalin. Welcome to the latest episode of Defense Disrupted. I'm joined here today by a wonderful leader who I have a few life intersections and coincidences with, so I'm excited to see what I can learn today. On the podcast, we have Emelia Probasco. She holds a senior fellow position at Georgetown University's Center for Security and Emerging Technology. So she focuses on military applications of artificial intelligence. Before CSET, she served as Chief Communications Officer at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, APL. There, she led technical and institutional communication in support of APL's strategic vision. She is a veteran. Her background includes service as a surface warfare officer, a SWO in the Navy. She deployed twice to the Indo-Pacific, served as in the Pentagon as a speechwriter for the Chief of Naval Operations, and even taught political science at the U.S. Naval Academy. Her accomplishments are diverse, but as if her time in service and leadership in the military isn't enough, she was also a Rhodes Scholar, went on to Oxford University. So it is an honor to be speaking with you, Emmy, and welcome so much to the podcast.
Ian, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
All right, well, let's jump right in. There's a lot of AI in your bio, so I'm eager just to jump into some provocative topics to kick things off. And please feel free to take the floor for even more of your story that I missed in the official bio, but maybe a breakthrough and a bridge, if you would, to understanding your areas of expertise. Maybe we could talk a little bit about responsible AI, and particularly in defense. So what does that mean? There's a lot of phrasing around it. There's policies on it, this doctrine. So what does responsible AI mean to you? What are you seeing in national security?
Yeah, I love it. We're going to get right into it. So
yeah, jumping right in. Yeah.
Responsible AI, let me try and weave together a few things here. And I'll start with, since we both have the surface warfare community in our blood. When I think about responsible AI, I actually think a lot about Aegis Weapons and Training Center, ATRC in Dulran. So I was, a little lieutenant on the ship out in San Diego, and I got tasked to be the fire control officer. And so when you're tasked this is the person who controls the Aegis weapon system on the ship, and I was the tactical action officer. Eventually, I started off as their warfare coordinator. Anyway, that just had to coordinate the ship's standard missile. And I also had some time as a Tomahawk weapons officer. Anyways, those are two pretty complicated, as you can imagine, weapon systems, and they send you to a really long school. And I remember very clearly, actually, my boss saying, before I left, I went up to him. I'm like, hey, what do you want me to learn? What do you want me to really focus on? I promise I'm going to study really hard. And he's like, yeah, just come back. You have to know everything. And he was like this really big, intimidating, Captain Shay Thompson, actually. He just retired. Super big, intimidating football player. And I'm like 5'4", sailor. So I went off and I tried to learn all of the capabilities and limitations of the Aegis weapon system. So they have this massive manual. It's capes and limbs. Okay, I know this seems like a really roundabout story to responsible AI, but that is responsible Aegis. The only way to do responsible advanced weapon systems is if you learn the capabilities and the limitations of the system as an individual warfighter. You then get certified by your ship to actually operate the system in particular situations. And then you've also got all the captain's battle order sort of layered on top of how and when you turn the thing on and when you call certain people and when you take certain actions. All of that is a wrapping around what is fundamentally an awesome weapon system that is also flawed. Like anybody who does this knows that it gets a little hard on cloudy days. You just have to learn that. AI, I know it sounds very different, but it is actually very similar. It is a flawed technology that does amazing things, and you just really need to know what the capes and limbs are. Responsible AI is, as any officer or leader needs to do, they need to figure out, when can I use it? What can I use it for? What sort of safety mechanisms? What sort of bureaucracy do I need to put around it to make sure nobody makes a stupid move? So that's the hard. Now, when you kind of get in the responsible AI, as I'm sure you've heard, it's a term of art that exists. And it's sort of at the intersection. One of the hard things about responsible AI, it's at the intersection of politics and policy and leadership and then technology. And it's where these two different communities are trying to come together so that they all mutually understand what matters. So when you often hear responsible AI from a policymaker, they're talking about it in terms of in the DoD sense, they use the word responsible as one of their metrics, but they also have things like, is it traceable? Can I kind of figure out how a decision was made? Is it equitable? Is the data sort of appropriate to whatever situation I'm in? Is it controllable? Can I make sure that it only does the thing that I want it to do? Those are all policymaker terms that are important to the way that a policymaker might shape strategy. But then the engineers have to sort of take it and figure out what does that mean in terms of bits, ones and zeros and algorithms. So that all of that goes into where the DC conversation is around responsible AI and where the technology conversation is around responsible AI. But whenever I talk to warfighters, it's how do you govern yet another imperfect but pretty awesome technology?
Yeah, it was an unfair question with a very broad, inclusive response. So I commend you for being able to overcome the unfair question I started out with. But I'm processing what you shared, and I'd never heard of that phrase before. And I wish more of the warfighter conversations were around capabilities and limitations. Instead, I would say, from my perspective, where I mostly see it is just selling fear and risk management. It's just like irresponsible. And no one wants to be irresponsible. So of course you want things to be responsible in warfare and in grim decision making. But why is it then that like, how would you bridge does my experience align with yours? And so where is that conversation going? Like you can say, the engineer's view is, oh, well, a weapon system is deterministic. I throw baseball this high, it'll go this far with this much force and then land in a predictable fashion. A great deal of AI and machine learning, whether it's a large language model or whether it's a forecast, it is almost intrinsically statistical. It's a probabilistic, not deterministic experience. The probability game statistics can be very useful, but it also, by definition, is a different worldview. It's like, nuclear physics versus Newtonian physics. Like, it's supposed to be a different thing, right? And so that's kind of an engineer's view. I wonder then, like, I'm immediately thinking, well, how can I talk about more like capabilities and limitations in my own life and in my own work? Do people want to learn the details of such things, or is it just all rude emotion of, well, I don't understand it, so therefore it's irresponsible, so someone else go figure it out?
There's a lot to unpack there. I think we can spend the whole rest of the time talking about this. I have a theory that there are people who think AI is garbage and fake, snake oil. There are people who think AI is the most amazing thing ever, and then they welcome their new robot overlords. And then there are the people who have actually used AI, and they're in the middle. It is. I feel like in so many of my conversations, it's this bimodal distribution. Either you love it or you hate it. But I would say increasingly, I'm seeing more and more people in the middle who understand that, again, got some pretty awesome capabilities and once you know what the limitations are, you can kind of start to use it well. So just to dig in on this a little more, the people who think, this is crap. And I mean, if there's actually this great quote, I studied the Maven smart system for a long time with 18th Airborne, and I'm sure we might get into that later. But there's this fantastic article in Bloomberg where she got some army guy to sort of say on this shit don't work was literally what he said. And like that notion still exists. On the flip side, then you have people, I mean, the Russians actually, I'll pick on the Russians because they're easy to pick on. There's a statement where they say AI will completely eliminate the fog of war, also wrong. So you have to find the middle. And just to give you a sense of all this huge remit of awesome applications that are in the middle that are not eliminating the fog of war or crap, things like foreign disclosure, using an LLM to do foreign disclosure. You can use it to identify an intelligence report, what you don't want to kind of go when you do a foreign disclosure. And then with your own eyes, you can very quickly validate, is it right or is it wrong? That's a pretty constrained sort of an application. Other ones, where you can use, and that was an LLM example. Let's say you just took a computer vision example, go put bounding boxes around tanks and then surface those images so I can look at them. As soon as you look at them as a human, you can be like, yep, good or not good. But these are more narrow applications that dramatically improve your ability to do certain tasks. And you just got to know where to apply them, where to find the right application of the AI, as opposed to, push a button and the entire O plan's formed up and the drones are flying. That's not
Yeah,
great.
it's like there's an orientation to the tools before they understand it. I got young kids, and I've definitely seen one of my kids use a screwdriver as a hammer. And because it just made sense, it was like, bah, 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 bah. They're like, okay, well, it can work, but oh gosh, no. Like, and I feel there's a lot of that going on with AI. It's like, oh, I can do this. We're great. I'm wondering, there's kind of these famous like tech adoption curves in Silicon Valley. It was like the techno optimists that are the first ones to jump in there, and then it kind of reaches this kind of like valley of despair when it doesn't do what most people think it does, and then ultimately becomes kind of this reluctant acceptance. I think there's like this inverted geometry, which I want to like draw out now and make a podcast out of. But it's like, what's the military version of that? And it's like hatred on first announcement. Bunch of people come in with snake oil, to quote you, claim it can do something that is absolutely not true. 4 years later, money is wasted on it. Everyone has the nerve to be surprised. Oh my gosh, this company that has never done AI, their AI doesn't work very well. And then they, oh my God, I can't believe it. Well, therefore, you can't trust these people. Like, this is weird. I don't know what the shape of that necessarily would. Frankly, I think, although it's a different category, I'm kind of hopeful from a policymaker perspective, which I think you're operating within and advising and working with more regularly than I am. I'm kind of waiting for Waymo to take over Washington, D.C. They don't have a proper taxi license, I don't think, but they're test driving. Apparently, it's going to be released in just a few months. I feel like once your stereotypical, whatever the demographic is, your stereotype of a congressperson, once congress people are routinely taking Waymos to work, they'll think, hey, this AI ain't that bad. Now, AI is not autonomy, but they don't know. Not necessarily, it's going to feel different. Like, as there's a lot of this automation, AI, this guy gets lumped together into this scary explosion where no, they feel that they don't understand it is too overwhelming so fast, so the hell with it all. And you end up kind of almost hoping for these smaller pockets of adopters that try to figure out how to test it. But then, I think this gets into, I think, the broader question of like, well, how are there successes in any of those experiments? You mentioned let's go to Maven Smart System. So that's a tee up into a pretty well covered topic, but also one that has reps and sets. That is an example of a program that's been out for a bit, has some lessons learned. Broadly speaking, is probably being deployed globally, and I can say it, properly here on this channel. You mentioned you did a study on that. Like, what are some of the broader lessons of where these types of systems can be useful? Where are things coming out to actually help American national security in spite of the fears around responsible AI?
Yeah. So can I just back up a little bit and then I'll go into Maven? But I think the general public can sometimes lose sight that the military is a fundamentally pretty conservative place. Nobody wants to die. Nobody wants to kill anyone. We just want security, and we really do not like making mistakes culturally. And so that's this reaction to a new technology that is not fully proven is culturally makes a ton of sense for our community. Where that changes, where the military starts to shift is when you're under threat, and then the risk calculus changes. So if originally on a, peacetime, the risk calculus is around, are my sailors safe? Wartime, it's still around, are my sailors safe, but are they safe in combat now? And I have to take different actions. One of the reasons that I think that the Maven Smart system succeeded where it succeeded, which is the 18th Airborne, is because the 18th Airborne's risk calculus is indexed differently from the rest of the force. Those guys are deployed all the time. In the course of our study, I lost count of the number of times they got deployed somewhere to go to respond to some emergency. And they feel the heat of operating every day, and it changes their willingness to embrace new technology. I think it's actually a really important part of the Maven story to remember that in 2017, algorithmic warfare cross-functional team that Bob Work stood up was just getting going. And I've talked to Colonel Drew Kukor, who really deserves an enormous amount of credit for getting Project Maven off the ground. It wasn't like somebody said, or Colonel Kukor said, we're gonna do AI, and then everybody ran around and said, yeah, that's a great idea, let's go. He had to find the right partner to operationalize the capability. And they actually started not with the 18th Airborne fires, they started with Intel. And they struggled. It sort of failed in the Intel world. And then Drew Kukor finds this guy, Joe Callahan, Colonel Callahan, and they decide between the two of them that actually, and General Kurilla, another massive leader in the space, that it's not just about Intel, it's about ops plus Intel. And that we can kind of close the targeting is the nexus of ops and Intel, and that this is where we can apply AI. For those in the audience who are not familiar with Maven Smart System, and it's got a bunch of permutations at this point, there's different systems. It's not, at the time that I was looking at Maven, it wasn't a bunch of AI. It was really just a little bit of AI, computer vision, at the beginning of a longer workflow. And it was really workflow software that made a massive difference. Workflow, because, previously, again, if you haven't been in this situation, you may not know it's Excel spreadsheets and what they call swivel chair command and control. So just basically a guy turn his chair to the next guy and they have a conversation and then a decision is made. And actual workflow software that tracks who made what decision when and who's got the next action to take made a massive difference. And if you're wondering how much of a massive difference, what we were able to see was that 18th Airborne could do with 20 guys what in previous conflicts took 2,000. So they are far more efficient. So that's what they did. How it became successful. One is that you've got at least these two guys, Drew and Joe, who are what we ended up terming in the study. And when I say we, I know my name's on the report, but really, there's a great deal of credit to collaborators at CSET, Igor Mikhailovich Torreira, and then we had Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. I teamed up with my old buds from APL, Christine Fox, Alan Brown, and Tony Matheny. But we all worked together and said, hey, you know what? These guys are what we're calling trilingual leaders. They have three critical skills that had they not had those skills and been in the positions they were in, I don't think we would have gotten the success that we saw. They had operations, so they understood the targeting cycle. They were well familiar and had, like I said, the 18th Airborne deployed all the time. They understood technology, and that was for a whole variety of reasons. It wasn't like they had computer science degrees. I'm pretty sure Joe Callahan has a history degree. They just figured it out. They're curious. There's so much technology in the military. They got it. And then the last skill that most people overlook was that they understood contracting and acquisition, and they were contracting ninjas. And that was key. They needed those three things to bring the technology players, the commercial sector technology players into the operations and get to real outcomes that were measurable. Some other elements of that story that like what made Maven successful at that first iteration were things like they took on DevSecOps. So they were doing a 90-day cycle of developing the technology, and then they'd sync it up with their Scarlet Dragon exercises. So they were constantly testing things out. And once tested out, if it worked, it deployed with them when the 18th Airborne got called up. So they were doing that constant iteration and using the tech as they developed it. And then last, maybe just there were lots of lessons learned, but the last points I'd bring up were the engineers deployed were deploying or were sitting next to the soldiers. And that mind meld. And in fact, the Army, especially Joe Callahan, invested a ton of time training the engineers and making sure they felt like they were a part of the team so that there could be very honest conversations about what was actually needed.
I wonder how much that scales across the larger enterprise. So let me ask it though in this concept. Like how do I say this? Like what's the biggest misconception that operational military units have about AI? To build on your previous point, just to narrow it down on maybe a little, because all right, well, I need to do exactly what Joe Callahan did. I need all these things. I need like a bunch of engineers deployed with me. Like is that? But that would be a literal exaggeration of what I think you just said. So they're kind of instead of that, or maybe that is the case. What do you think the most of those operational units are a misunderstanding in terms of how they adapt those lessons into their mission?
It's a great question. I think sometimes it feels just so overwhelming. You don't quite know what AI can possibly. You don't know the realm of the possible, and then you think, well, just the AI magic will make the things work. And I totally get that. I would actually recommend, and I thought this was a really smart part of the recent AI action plan that got, I think, released last month. It directs the Department of Defense to identify workflows that could be enhanced by automation and AI. I think that's the right way to go about it. I'm right now studying the scaling issues with things like how do you take an AI-enabled decision support system a la Maven and scale it up. And the very first thing that I went to go look for were other well-characterized, well-understood processes that are repeatable, and then start to stretch them out and say, okay, where does not just where does the software help? I'm going to assume there are lots of fantastic people who listen to your show who are figuring that out right now, but where do you stick the different AI techniques in order to accelerate the cycle? So I think that if someone's looking to say, what am I going to do with this? I wouldn't necessarily, I know there's a lot of interest in joint planning and can I just sort of press a button and it'll do all that for me? I understand the intuition and the desire there. I would say start with something a little bit lower level, find those cycles and then that are characterized and then start to place it in a software system where you can apply different AI techniques as you go. Does it answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. It's also making me just like entertained in my experience having so the entertaining part. I'm having this like visualization of like the engineer co-located, battlefield, deploying, frontline coding. A lot of that's just cleaning dirty data and getting into something that's useful. Like you can call that engineering. I wouldn't really call it data science, more like data plumbing. Incredibly helpful. That can be useful. That's different than like automating a workflow which is low-hanging fruit, classic aspects of any technology basis, printing press level, just like, yeah, it used to be manual, now it's faster. That's a benefit to humanity. I get that. I'm also though thinking of just like the stereotype, and I say this with humility, just like the stereotype of like your Silicon Valley CEO like running around 18th Airborne Corps right now. I was like, oh, that's not going to go very well. This part of it is like, do we really want to unleash the tech pros? I think it's a terrible idea. Like, why would we do that to a warfighter? They deserve better treatment than that. Like, so I mean, what I would say, who are the right folks out there? I mean, do you have any direct observations of that? To the military leaders that are tech savvy, you described that as a bit of a standout. The Silicon Valley or New York City, whatever, like your tech innovators that are mission focused, also a bit of a rarity, right? Almost by at least by cultural stereotype. And so I'm curious about how much you can repeat that out. And I think is where we're getting into that kind of second, third chapter of AI innovation within the DoD. There's been these early rounds of these wonderful pioneers demonstrated some level of success, and now it's getting popular, which may be a bad thing because then the quality of interest is going to hurt the very expansion of the very tools that are out there. I mean this in a people sense. So the right people going forward and learning these lessons. And again, present company excluded, obviously. I'm not, feel free to make fun of the tech bros. I'll take it. It's fine. But like my partner was like, oh man, I don't know if that's what they really want or what's really best to achieve the shared outcome. Do you see my curiosity and my skepticism?
I think I'm just must be exposed to the coolest tech bros ever because the tech guys and gals that I saw at the 18th, many of them were veterans, let's be clear. And then they they were so darn excited. I met with a young set of 4 deployed engineers, and I remember sitting there thinking, like, first of all, in the Pentagon, if you were anything less than a lieutenant, you were not talking to I mean, I was there with Christine Fox, who was the former acting deputy secretary of defense. So, like, you don't just walk in front of the DepSecDef and say, like, hey, I'm 26 and I just got off a ship. But these guys were like 26, 27, 28. Like, they're pretty fresh out and they were awesome. And they were awesome not just because they were smart with tech. Like, they were so excited by the mission. They were so excited to have this kind of impact. So I trust you and believe you that there are others that I don't want anywhere near the 18th Airborne, but like that would go for any population. There are a cadre of engineers who I think are excited by, I mean, they're excited by the mission. I think this is especially true in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. A lot of people got motivated off of watching that happen. I think there's a second one though that like the military's got pretty hard problems. We're not looking for cat videos. And so those problems are so technically challenging that they are appealing to a subset of engineers who want to see if they can make a run at hard problems. There was an interesting story when I was with 18th Airborne where I was told that apparently there was this cadre of engineers who would basically move from company to company depending on which company was working on the coolest military contract because they just wanted to have that impact and they didn't care what company it was.
That's very true of startup culture. I can see that. That doesn't surprise me at all, but I can see why it's weird to the military culture. I think a lot about this. The military culture versus startup culture, there's a lot of things that don't translate. Risk appetite, long memories versus short memories. You've been at the same company for 3 years. That's so weird. Why are you there so long? That doesn't translate very well to the sense of purpose and just a different career, talent retention, who ends up sticking around for various reasons. But I'm going to misquote the famous tweet on this, but there's some version of like, born too late to invent electricity, born too early to travel to Mars, so I'm stuck selling enterprise SaaS applications. And it's just like, there's this sense of meaning and purpose, which you are tapping into with that comment, that there are extraordinary number of people that want to have a greater impact on the world through public service, to have a sense of utility and impact that is fantastically boring if you're going to sell ads in a lot of the tech companies that tend to dominate that market. And so, yeah, I think I frankly, personally, at the risk of sharing too much of my own opinion on this, I mean, I guess I'll frame it as a question if you disagree, but I think that's what's driving a lot of the weirdness around defense tech right now is that we actually are attracting as a market the best and the brightest. And then we're creating these extraordinary, super hard, deep tech breakthroughs that is leading to people trying to get rich off of it with lots of money. And then, oh, in that case, I can hire more people. And so that there are enough great inventors and builders who do care about the mission, and it's feeding a bit of that. That's where we're getting those system effects, or those like reinforcing fires, where more folks are leaning into it for exactly the reason that I think you're describing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I'm overexposed to people who are mission based, but I think most people wake up in the morning and want to do something that matters, and from wherever they sit, and there are a lot of people find their way into national security. They care about their community, they care about the country.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about why that's so important. You mentioned Russia a couple of times, so let's dig into that. Let's talk about the competitive dynamic at the geopolitical level. So China talks a lot very publicly about AI dominance. Russia, you quoted some of their reference to AI weapons. So, from your perspective and the unclassified podcast that we are here, what are you concerned about that they're actually doing that should worry us?
I mean, the biggest worry is that they're just figuring out how to adopt it faster than we are. So I think oftentimes the conversation in the United States, for totally understandable reasons, is focused on the frontier models and how amazing is the development of the technology. And that's super important. Don't get That's kind of, for some of this, that's the sine qua non. But in terms of winning a war, it's equally about how fast have you adopted the thing. Are you using it in all the various different ways? Do people understand the capabilities and limitations? Is there doctrine, operations, TTPs? Like, do you have the full suite ready to go so you can use this tech? That's the concern, is that, who's going to figure out how to get the entire operating force to use it in the most effective ways. So that's step one, just, adopt it. The other, in terms of where are they adopting it, I would say generally what I would say is everybody's looking to adopt it for generally the same things, at least that I've seen. And I don't have any classified access to that sort of information, I'm glad to say. But the one that is awkward, I mean, awkward's probably not a strong enough word, are the applications of AI for deepfakes and other cognitive warfare sorts of tasks. I don't think we have a good theory around the boundaries on that kind of activity. I don't think in the United States we have a good framework for dealing with it. It's a potential threat. It's a major threat vector. And that's a hard one because it's not just, you can talk about it in the sense of, oh, they're going to see deepfakes and it'll cause unrest in the United States electorate. That's one issue. But now let's get way more specific. Like, maybe I just want to mess with all the sailors in Hawaii. Maybe I just want to mess with specific policy. Oh, maybe I want to go find cybersecurity experts and go mess with the cybersecurity experts. Like, it's that targeting of people who are critical to our national security using the deepfakes. Like, that's the sort of thing that I start to get more worried about. And there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm for adopting AI towards that end by our adversaries. I'm glad there's not a ton of enthusiasm in adopting deepfakes by our military, but we really need to figure out what's our strategy here.
How new is that? So, so we're you're working in a collaboration with Georgetown. I am an alum, so I gotta get a little bit of a Hoya Saxa going on here. But I'm trying to remember a story I learned when I was a teenager about what I'd lose, and I'm gonna get this way wrong. And I hope someone on the LinkedIn chat will correct me and get the actual link. But just for a reflection, more of a question, I think there was an overthrow of a regime, and I'm going to say Guatemala, that was led by a intelligence community organization in like 1954 that was primarily distributed by radio. That there was like this radio show that made the president of that country think that they were being overthrown, and it was entirely fictionally produced in a Hollywood style, but it was so convincing, the president literally ran out of the palace. I may be exaggerating that memory from a Georgetown class I took 30 years ago, but like that's a deep fake. That's basically a produced story that got rid, I guess it effectively in that case, of the enemy through nonviolent means. So maybe it was a better, I don't know how to qualify that from a good or bad perspective, but I think that was a 1950s version of a deep fake, right? So like how different is that risk in the AI world? And are we not just, it's just the sharper blade of the same thing that we've been doing for a knife fight?
I think the main difference is scale. Radio waves are only going to go so far until they start to peter out. I can get a message around the world, if I sort of understand the various social networks. So the scale is just much greater. And then you can accelerate the speed with AI, because now let's talk about, I'm not familiar with that particular example, but if you can imagine, if I need to create a convincing story, I can now do that more rapidly using things like LLMs. I can then create multiple fake personas. I can use them in different, I can use them on social. I can use them on radio because I can, deepfake a voice. I can do a deepfake video. There's like just this whole suite of tools that takes your example, which I think, this is the criticism. Hey, how is this new? I would say the scale is just so dramatically larger that it's worth thinking about in a different way.
At the risk of, I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for recommending something else in popular media, but I'm just going to go for it. There was this really interesting movie on Netflix called Mountainhead, or
I haven't seen it yet. I've heard about it.
that's literally what you're describing is the plot of that movie. And it's just the speed and scale of misinformation. And then you add video content and other things that people just foundationally, globally don't believe, that it creates real world violent blowback to fake stories is basically, I think, the tenet of the kind of the background. It's a very kind of Greek tragedy where all the violence is happening off screen. We just see these billionaires like in this like random mansion talking about the violence and the misinformation. That's basically the plot. And so the concept in a weaponization and warfare is, well, there's the AI to find the deepfakes as a defensive measure, as much as you would have AI to offense impact the enemy, so to speak. I think the whatever fake news or deepfakes or some version of whether we're fake is a category of AI content that is being weaponized. And I think there's bridging to kind of a more broader topic of where are the threats? Where is the AI battle space? What is the AI arms race? I think there's different versions of it. There's the fake stuff. You mentioned computer vision. That's I think another category. LLMs, another text-based kind of category of modalities of human interaction. What are the other edges of the AI battle space beyond the three that I just talked about? What are you studying?
In terms of techniques,
Surface area, exposure areas. So like, I can be exposed to risk from deepfakes. Okay. I can have automation and speed through LLMs. Got it. Computer vision, basically targeting. They can find me faster than I can find them and vice versa. Okay. These are all kind of AI things, the frontiers of the AI battle space. What other ones are you seeing where these AI tools, particularly in the context of quote unquote, the enemy or the threat or the pacing threat or great power competition? I think it's all basically saying the same thing. Where are the places that AI will have those tension points with folks like China and Russia?
cyber.
Cyber? Okay. Yep.
There's a colleague of mine at CSET, Drew Lohn, wrote a great paper, evaluated the cyber offense defense balance. And the bottom line is that there's no proclivity one way or the other. They could do either, which is bad if we don't figure out how to use it to defend ourselves. In fact, I just have to share this. There was a great post recently about something called the Great Refactor, where they're talking about, hey, could we invest money to refactor some of the open source code and into a more secure language so that we could improve cybersecurity for the great masses? Like, if that sort of investment now, that's a great way to spend some time and some money so that we don't end up on the bad side of AI and cyber. And the other one you brought up that is, I think, useful, but it's unclear to me yet how much of a step change this could be, is the use of LLMs in particular, but all the different ways in which we're using AI for sensors or anomaly detection, for, the whole rendering the seas transparent problem, or the whole finding anything in the world at any point in time. There are so many more sensors. We're developing new, very cool sensors, like with quantum sensing, and now we're able to integrate that information and search it or identify changes in it in novel ways. And so there's this big concern about, can you hide anymore?
My mind goes to the science fiction stories of, Jarvis and Iron Man or Minority Report or, they're like, where are they right now? And, or even just a Fast and the Furious movie. Like there's, oh, we said right here at exactly this time. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Okay, hold on. So that I think there's evolutions towards that science fiction future. And I in just thinking out loud in this conversation, I'm like, oh, I missed another big one. Cyber is a big category. Autonomy. Not just of the cars that we were talking about in taxis in Washington, D.C., but what is broadly, I think, described as the drone explosion of Eastern Europe and elsewhere. There's a hell of a lot of drone companies claiming all sorts of capabilities, not just to drive in movement that is AI driven, but the perception and the action that may or may not be AI driven. I think that's another evolving category as well that I'm curious about. And I know other countries are choosing differently than ours in terms of what they are trusting the robots to do.
I do believe you're right that there are differences in what different countries trust the robots to do. There's still no Terminator, just in case anybody, that science fiction movie gets brought up all the time, and that's not real. There's an issue with AI and drones. Autonomy in drones is one thing. But there are a lot of folks now that think, oh my gosh, these drones, they've all got this AI on them. And so they're completely autonomous in the terms of searching out and destroying a particular target. So again, like another very cool CSET study about edge compute. But there was this really nice study that Kyle Miller did where he dug in and said, listen, like, turns out compute messes with swap size, weight, and power on a drone. And so you can't have all these cute little DJI drones flying up with a bunch of AI on them because they just can't support the weight, the power, and their range comes down, their altitude comes down. Like their military utility starts to go down the more and more compute you try and add. So there are some limits to where AI gets put on the drones, and many people aren't tracking this super closely. So they think the drones in Ukraine are AI, and the drones in Ukraine are mostly first person viewer. So they're, get their little screens on their phones and they're driving around that way. There are more and more different kinds of autonomy and AI are being used, but it's not some sort of universally capable. I throw the thing up in the air, it finds the bad guy, shoots it down, and I'm done. But yeah, I think, the technical problem that I hear talked about a lot is the navigation issues. Not just, sort of safety of navigation up in the skies, but for those of you who are concerned about the Pacific, it's undersea and surface navigation and avoiding obstacles there. So that's where I think we need more autonomy, and there's a lot of work going on.
In San Francisco, about 10 blocks away from where I'm standing right now, there is a like weeknight date thing that happens where people can, I was walking the dog and I saw young people doing young things, but they were literally watching, like, I don't know, I'm going to go with like 3,000 drones in the sky as like a romantic thing to do. I know some parts of the military that are struggling to fly 10 drones at a time. And I'm like, my day job versus walking the dog, I'm seeing two different worlds in the same nation that they are unaware that the other is capable of that or incapable of that.
Well, but those are still, like, I think, unless there's some really cool stuff going on in San Francisco, like, they're pretty different technologies, like little tiered drones that are going to be like stationary programmed in terms of where they are relative to the other and flashing lights at the right moment. Like, that's one set of problems. Avoiding, air defenses,
Yeah,
right?
very
Very
different.
different problem.
Yes, completely agree, and I think my part of peeling back the onion on what people think AI is, and then there's a close cousin of what they think autonomy is. I think building on your point, what I've seen is that people think something's autonomous, but it's actually remotely piloted, or at least remotely waypointed. And there's probably 3 people in a trailer for every drone in the sky. It's like that's not unmanned. It's the invert. It's the other word version of that. Yeah, it's like, no, you're throwing more bodies at that thing, and you still can't get it to do what you think it does. Like, so that's where I feel the language is very, I think sloppy language around AI and autonomy is irresponsible. I'll say it here. Responsible AI is to understand the words you're using, and most people are not even understanding the nouns or they're describing it with such sloppy inaccuracies, and then people ultimately have battlefield consequences because of a lack of understanding of the tech.
I agree with you. The very first paper I wrote for CSET was called "A Common Language for Responsible AI," because it turned out that NIST was using words in a different way than DoD, which was a different way than the IC. Like, everybody had their own set of responsible AI terms. So I'm emotionally, I am with you, Ian, but at the same time, I would make 2 points. First of all, attempts to define AI, I'll see you in about 5 years. And then 2 is this is non-intuitive tech, and it's changing so damn fast that those of us who might be deeper in it, and I will not pretend to say I'm, like, out there. If I was developing AI models, I would really like Mark Zuckerberg to hire me, but I'm not. My goal is to help translate some of the more technical things that are going on to the public that has to we need the public in on this conversation. We need them to understand what's real and what's not real. And if I start getting into the eaches of, like, LLMs and NLP and BERT and all the different sort of techniques that we're gonna get into, or you could potentially get into, I'm gonna lose them, and that's not my goal. Right now, like, I think we have to keep people who aren't in this world make this continue to be accessible to them so that they can get into it. So I hear your point, but I'm still okay using AI. I mean, every time I use the word AI, I'm like cough a little. I'm like, are we talking LLMs? Are we talking computer vision? Are we talking NLP? Like, what are we going to talk about? At this point, I've given up. I realize most people are talking LLMs, but it's fine. I'll do it. I'll do it for as long as I need to do it until everybody kind of gets where we're headed.
Final question here then. Let's talk about that accessibility. Where's the best place for our listeners to continue learning about your work and your studies? Can you give an open plug here for what you mentioned? And I mean, we, as an action for us as hosts, you mentioned a number of great authors and studies and papers, and I just want to like list them out. I want to make sure folks will do our homework as best as we can to help folks follow up on some of the things that you referenced. But more broadly, where can folks continue to track your work?
Thank you for the complete radio advertisement here. cset.georgetown.edu is the website for CSET. CSET is a pretty technical, nerdy think tank that's a part of Georgetown, basically.
I take that as a compliment.
Yeah,
As
I
a
love it. No, I love it. It's
proud Hoya nerd right here.
super higher. Yeah. That we actually understand the tech, and we buy data and condition data. There's a really cool thing we've got called the Emerging Technology Office or Observatory, sorry, that's mapping research and sort of trends in research as well as patents. We translate Chinese documents so that people can kind of understand where China is headed. Anyways, csets.georgetown.edu. And there are a bunch of great Substacks out there. Jack Clark's is obviously fantastic. Deeplearning.ai is another good one. Andrew Yang. I personally find Benedict Evans to be my favorite kind of sarcastic. He's a former A16Z analyst who talks about AI a lot. So he's much more on the application side than on the development side. But yeah, it can be a little overwhelming, all the different resources that are out there. But if you start at cset.georgetown.edu, that sounds great.
I definitely have my homework cut out for me, and thank you so much for sharing that. So once again, a special thank you to Emelia Probasco, a senior fellow at Georgetown University's Center for Security and Emerging Technology. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks, Ian. It's great to be here.